Hey guys, this is Mannequin. Today I'm going to teach you how to make the perfect kick. Okay, I lied. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to teach you a couple tricks and tips and techniques and stuff like that and everything you need to know about how to make a really good kick. So, first thing is, my first suggestion is to listen to other songs. You know your style, you know what you want to sound like. Listen very closely to what those kicks sound like and generally how they're shaped. Now, second tip. Mix your kick in after you have something else. You cannot just mix a kick by itself and expect that it'll fit in your track later. So my suggestion is build most of your track, throw a kick in there, have it work, and then make so you could hear it and stuff like that. And later on, as you get to the final stages of your track, mix your kick in so your kick sounds really good. And the reason being because people are buying your track not for the kick but for the music. So if that's what they're buying, then you want to make sure that that's what the kick is centered around. That said, the kick is a very essential part, so you cannot have a bad kick and expect the rest of the track to sound good because, long story short, a lot of EDM producers say that your track is centered around the kick. That is true and not true. It is true in the sense of a good kick is considered the minimal thing that you need for a track. If you don't have a good kick, then chances are your track is going to be thrown out the window. So essentially, your kick drum needs to be taken for granted. If people are noticing that your kick drum is not sounding good, they're going to throw it out the window. So that said, I have a bass line here. Nothing amazing. That's got a lot of bass. But anyway, I'm going to pull that down just because it has so much bass. And then I have a kick drum here. It's actually a pretty good kick drum. I like this one, and I imagine I'm going to be using a lot more later. I cycled through quite a few samples to find this one, but I am going to show you the primary thing you need to do when you're working with kick drums that you need to worry about, and that is the dreaded bass. And this is actually one of the reasons why bass is so hard is because people boost the bass in the wrong spot. And I'm going to tell you right now, that is actually the biggest issue when it comes to EQing kicks. So, first thing I want to talk about is that very issue itself because it is the biggest issue. I might talk about a little bit of compression later here, but for now I just want to focus on this. So, you have your kick drum. I'm going to pull this down in volume because I'm going to be boosting the lows, and that's instantly going to cause the volume level to peak and start clipping here. So you have the kick drum. I'm going to solo this so you can kind of hear what's going on. People tend to boost right here because it sounds nice, doesn't it? It sounds heavy. Now, while that is true, that's not actually what you want in a kick drum. That's for your bass line. Very important thing to keep in mind. This spot is for your bass line. Remember that. If you remember nothing else, remember that. So what am I going to do with right here? I'm going to cut it. Yep. Sorry, guys. Hate me now from now on. Just hate me. So I am cutting this, and you're going to hear that it probably doesn't sound all that great now. Whoops. That's not a very good comparison because for volume difference. But here we go. So here it's the yellow one. So if you notice, this has it has like this sound in it. And if I cut this, it actually loses that ooh sound, and it starts to sound more, it sounds like it's more focused around the punch of the kick. And this is what happens when you start to EQ and compress your kick and you notice that you get more bass, but your kick sounds really flat. So very important thing. Keep in mind, cutting this is what gives your kick that punch. Your kick is not a sub in the sense of it needs to be long and have a lot of trail and be hanging out a lot. It does in one spot, and I'll show you that one spot, but the rest is entirely punch. So, keeping that in mind, you want to cut here when you're EQing. If you don't do complex things like separating your kick into two spots, the high end and the low end, and EQing the sub and the punch separately, then just at least do this. Now, the other thing you want to do is you want to cut the very low stuff. Now, very low stuff is not this tidbit right here, actually. I'm going to pull this all the way up to 30 hertz. If you're not filtering off 30 hertz and below, then you're taking up a lot of unneeded space. So I'll show you that there's essentially no difference to what I'm cutting here. You can't really tell any difference. All this really does is muddy things up. And a lot of people say filter this off because you can't hear it. The counter argument is you can't hear it, but you can feel it. Now, so that's one of the things about bass that people talk about a lot. You can't hear it, but you can feel it. It makes a very big difference, especially to audiophiles. That is true. You can't hear it. You can feel it. But at the same time, you don't want this. Even if you do feel this, you're not going to feel it. It's not going to feel good. And the reason is because this is very low frequency and it starts to not sound like smooth low end. It starts to sound rumbly. So you have a rumbly spot here and a rumbly spot here, and you don't want the rumblies in your tumblies. So so what you should be doing is you should be cutting this here and cutting this here. And if you've noticed, I've been talking in a very strange fashion today, and that's because I have a cold and it's causing me to not get enough sleep, and I'm behaving weirdly. Also, the stress of college is doing some things to my mind too. So anyway, back on track. I've cut here and I've cut here. Don't want the rumble here, and I want to cut here to get smoothness. So what do I do with the rest of my track? You'll notice that I no longer have a need to pull this down because I'm cutting so much. So I could actually do a very I could do a very objective comparison. I have this kick drum, and now if I turn this off, this is what it sounds like with those in. Now you'll notice that sounds a lot heavier, and you're right, it does sound a lot heavier, and I'm not gonna argue with that, but that's not what you want at this stage. You want to get rid of this because this is where your bass line goes. Now if we listen back to my bass line, I said this has a lot of bass at the beginning, and if I go into the EQ, pull this down a lot so that I'm getting rid of most of this here, and I take this, most of that good sounding bass is right there. If you look where I cut in my kick, I cut right there. This is no coincidence. No, I did not plan this either. So the cool thing about this is basically what I did is I now have space for my bass line without even trying. I knew that this had a lot of bass, but I did not EQ this. It was like this with just a compression for the sidechain, and I didn't even check to see where the frequency was. I just knew that this kick drum, it sounds good if you have it like this, nice and heavy, a lot of bass, but that bass is not smooth bass. That's a heavy bass. Heavy bass goes for your bass line. So I've already said that a couple times here. I'm good at repeating myself. I've said that in other videos too. So now I could actually pull up this sub right here, and you'll start to hear the real sub part being prominent. And since I'm cutting this, I'm not getting a lot of low end buildup. And since I'm cutting this, I'm keeping some of the free space. So this probably isn't going to sound too great, just because typically I separate things and I have my sub in a separate track, because that's how I like to deal with things. But if you'll notice, this one sounds, they're actually pretty much the same level, 3.6 and 3.1. So if I turn this down just a tiny bit, now 3.1, 3.6, whatever. So you notice as I switch back and forth between these, one of them it sounds deeper and it's got more punch, where the other one sounds muddier, and but it's got a lot of that heavy bass. That bass part is left up to our bass line. That's what fills it out. Don't worry about the fact that we lost a lot of that. So we lose a lot of that sound, but we lost that for a good cause. We now have sub that is clean and tight, and you could actually, if you go in and you separate the kick into two parts, you can make that kick buttery smooth. So I'll try that in a second here, see what I could do, but I'm actually wearing headphones, so I can't work with the bass as well as I usually do. But for now, let me show you in terms of the bass line what difference we made. Now, if I turn this off, it sounds really flat. Now, it sounded okay. The difference between the two, and mine just kind of sounded like it was tighter, and it has less sustain and stuff like that. But really, you could argue, but I like the sound of this bass more than I like the sound of this bass. So the kick sounds okay both ways. So let me just turn this off. But when you go into the mix, you really see that cutting out this spot that's left of the bass line lets the bass of the bass line be the bass that you're really hearing, and the kick is a sub that'll hit your body, and you'll feel that when you're in a live loud sound setting. And you're at high volume levels. The heaviness of the very low end here, not this gets really, you get these really weird vibrations that don't feel good. Right here is what gives you, I'm saying right here generally because it's from somewhere around here to somewhere around here for this EQ plugin. That would translate from 30 to 50 hertz. That's where your kicks very, very low end should be. Now you want to cut right after 50 hertz so that you have room for your bass line. But like I said, the kick, the very low end here is what hits you at those live events. That's what you feel pulsating through your body. That's what you want from a kick. And then you get the punch of the kick that doesn't, it's not what the residual part. This is the residual part that is heavy and is vibrating your body. The punch of the kick that you get all the impact is right here. So you don't want this. This is for the bass line. This is for the vibration and the sound that you hear at the same time. So this is a spot that you can hear and you can feel. You leave this up to the bass line. If you don't have a bass line that is taking that up, that's how you get a break. The break doesn't have that vibratiness, but if it still has a kick drum, it has that impact and that tightness. That's just also amazing. So you always leave that spot for your bass line, regardless of whether or not your bass line is something like this, or if it's something that goes at a less constant interval. It's like dut 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 dut, and it's not as tight here. Or if you just have something that's pretty much a pad that's acting as your bass line, no matter what genre, your kick is always going to have this different EQing sound. So you'll want to cut, obviously, like I've said 100 times, you want to cut this low end, but you want to keep this here. It's very important that you're not boosting all this right here because you lose the impact and clarity of it. You start to get this weird vibration feeling. You can't hear sound past that. Ooh, that's not good. Bring that back up. Sorry. So that's why you have it the way it is. And like I said, you really want to cut this. That's the important part. If you're doing nothing else, cut that. And the reason is because that's for your bass line. I'm doing a lot of repeating this episode because it's very, very, it's a topic on YouTube that is never covered. There are people that generally say on a lot of other mixing forums that, yeah, that's a frequency spectrum for your bass and your kick drum is generally around here, but they don't realize, well, they probably do realize actually, but they don't bother emphasizing that you want to cut right here. Because now if your kick doesn't have that, then don't worry about it. But this one, in the beginning, you could tell it had a lot of that because you could kind of hear the roundness and the heaviness of the bass. You don't want to hear the roundness and the heaviness. You want to feel the roundness and the heaviness, and it needs to be smooth, not vibrating. The vibrating comes from the bass line. So now that I've said that about 50 times, I can talk about the few other things you could do. So now we could tell big improvement. Instead of sounding like a muddled bass mess, it's very tight and the kick just cuts through. So I don't need to do too much to this one, but what I'm going to show you is one other very good trick. So I've been using a channel EQ for this. Now I'm going to switch to linear phase EQ. That's because the linear phase EQ does amazing things to retaining punch in the high end when boosting. If you use a normal channel EQ and you start to boost high end, you will get a boost in the high end, but at the same time, you will actually start to lose a lot of the punch And you may or may not realize that, and you may have seen that in some of your stuff before. But I'll show you what it does here with the regular channel EQ. You have this. I'm gonna start raising the high end, so you kind of get this brighter sound, but it just kind of sounds brighter. Now watch this. When I pull this up, you get a lot more click. This one sounds a lot smoother. It's more like a sound, and this one, whoops, let me turn that off. Sorry. This one sounds much punchier. So I don't want to boost that quite yet. First, I want to find where the click is coming from. You can already hear that I pretty much found most of the click. So if you listen, it sounds there, but it doesn't cut a lot. That cuts a lot, but at the same time, you kind of get this whistling noise because you're boosting right here. So this is where the high end comes in. You start to boost around here, and what do you get? A very big difference. Now there is a volume difference too, so you got to keep that in mind. But overall, this one does sound like it cuts through a lot more. Now you'll also notice that we're starting to lose some of the bass here. So you have two options. One, you could start boosting the bass, or two, you could do compression. I haven't done any compression to this, and I probably won't work too much with the compression on this one. Might do a little bit here just because I don't want to split this up, because I like the way this kick is sounding enough to where I don't want to cut off the sub and have two different tracks, one for the sub, one for the high end. If you were going to do that, the way you would do that is you'd have, I'll show you that in a second here. Actually, let me do that now. So I'm going to solo this, and what you would do for working with this one, if you were going to separate it, is you go create an EQ, 48 decibels per octave, and you just pull this up until you lose all of that bass, and it's all just punch. So anything past that is all the sub that we're going to be working with. Actually, the sub on this is really clean. So then obviously the way you'd work with the rest of this is you just duplicate it, go down here, and then change this. You have it at 102 hertz. So basically pull this down so the crossover is right. They're about crossing at the same spot, except for that needs to be at 48. So that means I need to pull this up closer and then turn off that. And then you've now separated these two, and similar process. You now have these two spots, and what you'll need to do is the first thing you'll want to do with this one is take that 50 hertz region and cut it. There we go, that sounds about right. And then pull this one down to about the 30 hertz region like we were doing before. And now I could actually show you to where I'll ditch this one for now, but this is why I typically split it up. Now I have full control over the low end without having to worry about EQ, and I can just go like this. So you notice I could pull this up now without getting much clipping at all, because there's no, I cut out most of that area that's reserved for the bass, and the bass takes up that area well, but the kick doesn't. It creates high volume increases really fast. So this one's still a little rumbly, so what I'll probably do is there we go, it's nice and smooth. Now I can pull up the gain on this. I don't want to have that too high there though. And the last thing I could do here is throw a compressor on it just to kind of smooth it out a little more, if the compressor will go on to it. Okay. So you want a nice long attack for the sub, and I prefer to have a non-curved knee, but that's just me. So what am I listening to here? So mostly what I've done here is I've taken it, so instead of swelling in, you get a little more punch. I'm going to bring down the threshold just a little bit and then turn up the makeup gain. Where do I have this set at? 8.9, so I could turn this up till it gets to about. Ooh, virtually no difference. This is why I don't spend too much time working on the compression of my kick. The biggest part there is cutting that one area, and I've done that here, so that's the biggest issue. And then mostly it's just about pulling it up. Except this one kind of sounds like I want to cut that and bring this up. Oh, but I want to be doing that on a linear phase EQ. So, you know, that's how you split it up. But I kind of like the way this was sounding better. Whoops, not what I wanted, but. So this one's a little too harsh up here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to see, I don't recall for sure how we work with this one when it comes to bass for the linear phase EQ. Because I know one of the interesting things it does is if you listen. Ooh, that's actually pretty smooth. I like that. Sometimes with kicks, it'll sound like it's dropping down. The bass is dropping down. And because they'll actually generate residual frequencies, I like to cut it a second time whenever I'm doing a boost this low. So you have a lot of sub, but it's not really sub that you could hear. So I'm going to do one quick thing really quick and compare this to the original, because that's kind of what makes the difference here if you're really just messing it up. So I've done 2 EQs on this. No compression. This is the original. And this is the processed. So you'll notice it cuts through just as much, but it doesn't sound muddy. And you don't need to worry too much about the low end not being heavy enough, simply because you want to leave that to your bass for the most part. If you do feel so inclined, you can add a little bit of here, but you got to remember that that's for your bass line. So you want to try to. There we go. I can't really hear what's going on in that because I'm wearing headphones. Otherwise, I get feedback through my microphone here when I'm recording. But it's what we got here is those two the two main important things I want to talk about, which is you got to cut these areas, and then you are free to boost this area, and then using the linear phase EQ to do more interesting things to the high end. So that's the biggest thing when it comes to processing a kick. It's you got to remember that it's about getting it to slot into where it belongs. Now, it doesn't fit perfectly. You could tell it sounds really nice like this. It sounds very smooth, and it's got heaviness and it's got punch. And I could compress this, but I really don't think I need to, because it sounds pretty good already. But I don't know. Let's see here. Yeah, let the attack through. So that makes it really tight, as opposed to before, and then you could just pull up the gain. But I don't feel any real need to be doing this compression, so I'm not too worried about it. Okay. So if you notice, this actually isn't affecting the peak level all that much by like quite a bit. So that's I think at this point it has enough sub to where if you start compressing it, you lose a lot of that. And I don't want to have too long of an attack here. Actually, what I could do is I could just do a little bit of compression on this. There we go. That makes it a little tighter without losing too much of bass. So basically, I just have the knee completely. So it's a sharp knee. I have the ratio at a somewhere between 2 and 3. Makeup gain is at 0 right now. Don't even worry about that. Don't do auto gain unless you're trying to expand your kick, which is a whole nother story in and of itself. And I didn't really mess with that. And the attack is something that you want to make sure it's nice and long so that you get enough of the transient through. There are other things that require more punch, but it's actually surprising how much punch a kick, how long the punch of the kick actually is, because when you're working with low end, things tend to be longer. So the fact that this is pretty long, even though I'm just getting the punch, that's not all that unusual. So quick comparison. So it kind of makes this more punchy. So it did actually make a good difference there, and I do like that better because it doesn't hang out as much. But this is where you'd want to EQ this, and if you consider a lot of that is at 50 hertz, like I told you, but you don't want a lot of this low end, as I already said. But we also don't want it to sit on top of the kick. So I'm going to cut off that entire area. The kick was around here, so I'm just leaving this area that we left for the bass. I'm going to leave that open. There we go. And then I'm going to cut right here just a little bit. I got these really close to each other, but those are it's because I kind of like this. I don't like right here because it starts to sound a little muddy, but I like right here because it kind of gives it some sort of harmonic warmth. So this one sounds smoother and heavier, but this one kind of sounds warmer. This one sounds warmer. I like the warmer one. Because if you use areas to accentuate the sound, like I used right here to accentuate the bass, even though I'm actually mostly doing cuts in the bass, you get the perceived warmness sound, which builds up. It starts to build up frequencies in this area, but I know I'm not going to throw an instrument right here, so I don't mind boosting right here a little if it makes it sound better. You could spend hours working on a single kick. And I've already spent quite a bit of time on this tutorial here, and most people probably have been gone by now. So, but really, as long as you walk away with the fact that your kick drum is supposed to take up the region right here and the region right here, and not that area right there, then you pretty much got it. So, and then EQing your bass line to fit in appropriately is good too. So thank you for watching, and I know that this was a rather unconventional in the sense that it's long, a lot of repetition, and I didn't really end up with too much of a big difference. But when you start to work with your kick, if you boost around this area like you normally think you should, your kick instantly gets muddy and nasty, and that's where that issue stems from. So if you're mixing, if that's how you mixed kicks before, then you should probably change that. Leaving it as is isn't that bad, simply because a lot of samples are already mixed and set at a very good setting. So you don't have to worry too much about that. But if you start trying to make it sound better and you're boosting around there, that's where your problem is stemming from, and that's what you essentially need to change. So yep. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, stuff like that, and please feel free to share your tracks and what improvements you may have gotten over the course of listening to some of these videos, so that everyone else can kind of see how you've improved as you've changed your styles and you've learned more over the years and picked up stuff. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next video.